Good evening, everyone. For those of you that are just joining, we're just giving the Zoom a chance to catch up with a number of participants and letting everyone into the room. For those of you that may have friends or folks in your network that weren't able to register or the webinar was capped out at about 990, if you look in the chat box, there's a Zoom link for the YouTube Live, and you're free to copy that and send it to anyone you like. And we have a question about the recording of the webinar. Yes, it will be posted. Casey, how are we looking with letting participants in? Should we continue waiting or should we go ahead and start? Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Mir Ali from Task Force Melmastya. I'm a litigation partner at the law firm Schiff Harden here in Chicago. Thank you all very much for joining. We were so excited about so many people signing up for this. So many people are passionate about helping with the Afghan evacuee situation. We're going to try to answer as many questions as you can. This webinar is focused on an overview of the humanitarian parole process, and then also going through the specific requirement for having a financial sponsor for each one of the Afghan nationals. Before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to Sang Lee, who is the Director of Programming at the Chicago Bar Association, and also the second Vice President of the Asian American Bar Association of Greater Chicago, to do a quick intro of our panelists and sponsors.
Thank you, Mir. On behalf of all the sponsoring bar associations, the Arab American Bar Association of Illinois, the Asian American Bar Association of Greater Chicago, the South Asian Bar Association of Chicago, the Chicago Bar Association Young Lawyers Section, Racial Justice Coalition. Thank you all for coming. A few months ago, our bar associations and others came together to talk about the need to collaborate to do our part to take on the biggest challenges of our time, specifically racism. We talked since then about the need to stand together in times of crisis for any of our communities. For the Arab American community, specifically the Afghan community, that time is now. Many of our members across our bar associations are immigrants or children of immigrants, and we see ourselves and our families within the Afghan community. We helped put this event together to do what we can to help, and we are so grateful for you to be with us here today. Thank you to Marvet Swais, Saranya Raghavan, Alicia Nieves for co-organizing this event. Thank you to Sarah Chowdhury, legal counsel at the State Comptroller's Office, a VP of the South Asian Bar Association, and co-chair of the Racial Justice Coalition, for all of her work on this event. She'll also be on the chat to answer some of the questions. And thank you to Mir for his leadership in this initiative locally and nationally, and to our other speakers whom I have the pleasure to introduce. First, we have Mahsa Khanbabai, founder of Khanbabai Immigration Law and adjunct professor at Stonehill College teaching immigration law. She represents clients with businesses and family immigration matters and advises international student entrepreneurs through the MIT Sandbox. She is regularly interviewed by news sources like NPR, Boston Globe, and MSNBC for her high impact work in immigration. Mahsa is elected director of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA, Board of Governors, serves as a member of AILA State Department and the AILA Law Journal, engages in further policy work. She is co-chair of AILA's Afghan Task Force, leading efforts to address legal issues faced by Afghans both in and outside of the US. Our next speaker is Vivian Khalaf, who is the founding partner at Khalaf and Abuzeer LLC in Illinois and his affiliate office, Agility Services in Palestine. Vivian has spent over 30 years practicing immigration and nationality law, helping clients with visas, naturalization, asylum, and removal defense to representing clients abroad at US consulates and embassies. Notably, she is one of 5 women lawyers who led in the case of Doe v. Trump, a class action litigation brought on behalf of US citizens and mixed immigration status families. This litigation was a leading force that compelled Congress to alter eligibility criteria in the second economic stimulus packages. Vivian has won much recognition for her work and currently serves on the boards of the Arab American Business and Professional Association, the Arab American Voters Alliance, Palestine Children's Relief Fund, and the Arab American Bar Association. Now I'll turn it back over to Mir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sang. You know, everyone that's joining here, I know this is a cause that's very near and dear to your heart. You know, on behalf of the veteran community, you know, prior to going to law school, I was a Green Beret in the Army Special Forces, did 2 tours in Afghanistan. So this is something that's very personally near and dear to my heart, like it is to many veterans as well. So we have a lot of veteran organizations that are helping to support the effort, and thank you to all of them as well. And Mahsa, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and Mir for all of your work, and all of the bar associations for the support for Afghans. So what I'd love to do is kind of just give you a little bit of an overview of what is happening with Afghans and break it down into some of the scenarios we're seeing. So currently we have roughly 4 groups that we're going to be talking about and how their situations interplay with some of the application process. So first, we have a group that are already in the United States on military bases that they're calling safe havens. They're being processed for parole and for work authorization cards right there on the military base. They're being provided opportunities to attend legal orientation services through AILA volunteer attorneys there on base, and all other kinds of services for like cultural accommodations and you know, the medical exams and that sort of thing. So we're really not going to be talking much about them. The next group are those that are overseas at military bases. Those are being called the lily pads. Unfortunately, because of a measles outbreak and the need to vaccinate those populations, there has been a 21-day pause on these individuals coming to the United States. And so I would estimate that roughly it's about another 10 days or so before that 21-day pause will be assessed, and these individuals will then be paroled into the United States. These individuals do not need to apply for humanitarian parole if they were evacuated by US forces. But of course, each case should be assessed on a separate basis. Once they're paroled in, they'll go through the process similar to those that are currently at the bases. We have the third group, which are those who are still in Afghanistan. Those individuals need to find a way to leave to try to take advantage of this humanitarian parole process. Unfortunately, there is no official US government assistance to help evacuate these individuals from Afghanistan. And I understand Mir is going to be talking a little bit about what efforts might be underway to help those individuals that are stuck there right now and want to leave. The lastly is the fourth group of individuals that have already been able to leave Pakistan on their own, either through visas to another country or through land border crossings into Pakistan generally, because we see that a lot of the other borders are closed right now with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, et cetera. There are ongoing negotiations to try to open that up as well as commercial airlines out of the United States. So we'll have to wait and monitor that. I will caveat that everything I'm about to say, and I'm sure Attorney Khalaf is going to be saying, is that this is all, assessed on what is happening right now. Things can change on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis sometimes. So please, keep in mind that what we're telling you is just for what's happening right now, and you really should get advisement from an immigration attorney or from a resettlement agency related to what is happening at whatever future time you're in this process. So what is humanitarian parole? Essentially, it's a request to USCIS to grant temporary permission for a person to enter the United States based on humanitarian issues. There's really great information on USCIS's website related to this, and I'll try to find the link and drop it in the chat box or the Q&A box. So essentially, it's the US government saying that, yes, we believe that there are some humanitarian issues that can be considered, and that we will allow a person to temporarily enter the United States. So how does one go about applying for humanitarian parole? There are several components to this process. The first is the actual parole request. It's done on a form called the I-131, and anybody can make this request. It can be a person in the United States, such a friend or a family member that wants to help someone that's currently in Afghanistan. It can be a person in Afghanistan themselves that wants to apply and sign the document. There are no restrictions on who can file the I-131 parole request. There's really actually there's no one right way to do it either. The form is not very intuitive or user-friendly. So, sit and strategize a little bit with whoever is helping you with the process to figure out what is the best way to do it. Sometimes I fill it out based on my client that's in Afghanistan. Other times I fill it out based on the person in the US. It's really a case-by-case determination that I make, assessing on what are the factors of that case. Now, you want to submit some supporting evidence for this parole request, right? You have to demonstrate what are the humanitarian considerations in your case and why you should be allowed into the United States. So I try to submit a statement explaining what are the conditions. Someone might have been Afghan special ops. Someone might have been a woman, a judge and is a woman and is in fear for their safety. There are many different reasons why a person might want to leave. And so you really want to demonstrate that with some sort of statement. And lastly, then each person that is seeking to come needs to file one of these applications. It can't be a family all on one application. So if you have a family unit of 7 people, 2 parents, and their parents, and then 4 or 5 children, every single person needs to have one of these applications completed. So the second part of a humanitarian parole application is the affidavit of support. Essentially, that is the form that's submitted by usually a US-based person, but it's not necessarily required, saying that I want to support this Afghan seeking to come to the United States. It's, again, a little bit of a complicated form. It's not very intuitive, but essentially it's the US-based person saying, I want to help this person. Here is how I plan to help them, and here are my resources that I plan to put at their disposal. Attorney Khalaf is going to be talking about that in more detail. Lastly, if a person has difficulty in paying the $575 filing fee for each application, a person can try to request a fee waiver, saying that I am unable to pay these fees. They must explain the basis of why they're unable to pay these fees. It could be because of financial hardship, for example, and submit that with the application. We don't know yet how these fee waiver applications will be adjudicated. And so that takes us to the next step. Once you file an application or an application is filed on your behalf, you can expect the following steps to take place. First, you will get an email receipt notice, generally within 3 to 6 business days of filing, if you pay the $575 filing fee. The hard copy receipt for a case like that would probably come in about a week, maybe 10 days. We're seeing fluctuating timeframes. If you apply for a fee waiver, however, we are seeing significantly delayed receipts. I myself, for example, have filed about 10 or 15 so far and another 30 this week with fee waivers. I have not received any receipts for those fee waiver requests yet. Early on, when some of my colleagues filed in late August, they said that it took about 10 days to get a receipt for a fee waiver case. So we're still waiting to see how CIS is going to process these fee waiver requests. In terms of processing times for the actual humanitarian parole application, CIS's standard line is it's about 90 days. We saw early on that it was taking about 4 weeks to process and approve the humanitarian parole request, but we understand that there are now hundreds and maybe even thousands of applications that have been filed. So we're seeing that there's a slowdown. We don't know how long it will take. It's still a wait and see approach. Now, all of what I've described so far is just the paperwork that needs to take place, right? These individuals, none of this paperwork will help that person leave Afghanistan because there is no US embassy in Afghanistan. A person is then going to process their paperwork at a US embassy in a third country after the humanitarian parole application is approved by CIS. So that consular processing involves the following steps. An application will be filed online at the State Department's website. It's called the DS-160 form. An application filing fee is going to be required of $160. And the person will then choose which embassy they wish to process their interview at, their humanitarian parole interview. They'll attend the interview on that set date. And that's where then we're looking to see what kind of guidance the State Department is issuing to the consular posts. We have not heard yet what that guidance is. There's a number of complications that could come up if a person does not have a passport, for example. Will they be granted an interview? Will they be approved for what we call a visa foil? Basically, it's this colored full-page sticker that's put into a passport that is the travel document that allows a person to board a plane and enter the United States. As many of you might know, the US State Department has been under significant strain these last few years with a lack of resources, with perhaps 300 to 400 consular officers having left the Foreign Service, and of course, COVID. So we're watching to see how long it will take for an individual to get an interview at an embassy and to be issued that boarding foil to be able to come to the United States after a humanitarian parole application has been approved. Lastly, what happens once the person enters the United States, the parolee? Essentially, this is a temporary status that allows a person to stay in the United States. It's expected to be for 2 years. That's what the government has announced. And so far what we've been seeing for persons that were paroled in because they were evacuated on a flight, they were given 2 years time. CIS has their official lingo and language. This is not a legal status. It doesn't mean that the person is here illegally. It just means that they actually don't have any visa status, like an H-1 visa or an F-1 visa or a visitor visa. They're here as a parolee. So they've been temporarily granted permission to enter and stay in the United States. A parolee will be able to apply for a work authorization document. And we expect those to all be expedited just like they are being expedited on the military bases. It might take a few weeks, maybe a month or two max, we don't know yet. And a parolee must maintain their legal status. That means that they're going to have to apply to renew their parole or extend their parole before their period of stay expires. So if it's a 2-year period, around 1 year, let's say 8 months or so, the person should try to apply to get an extension of their parole. Now, again, all of what I've just said is really contingent on what's happening right now. We are waiting for Department of Homeland Security to issue more guidance related to a lot of what I've just said, because we're finding that there are a lot of hiccups along the way as attorneys file these applications. Sometimes they're being incorrectly rejected. Sometimes when an attorney calls to get the case expedited, the contract worker that answers the phone, who is not a CIS officer, might not understand how an application was filed, if it needs an expedite request, how do you make an expedite request? So stay tuned for any new information. We try to put those out through AILA, the Bar Association. We also try to do some FAQs that I partner up with PARS and Penn State Law School's clinic. So you can always look there for additional resources on any changed circumstances or new things that happen. But for now, that's the summary of what's been happening in humanitarian parole.
Thank you very much, Mahsa. Casey, if we could pull up my slides, please. I'm going to briefly go over the 4 stages or phases that an Afghan evacuee goes through. So here.
Mir, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Casey, do I have control of the PowerPoint or do I need to tell you to advance? Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so first is ensuring the Afghan is safe and secure where they are. As Mahsa mentioned, it could be a week-long process, it could be a month-long process. So the guidance that Task Force Melmastya and a lot of the special operations groups that are helping to physically move Afghans out of the country is that if you are not in immediate danger, sit tight. And that's the best advice that we can give them for right now, because trying to move could put them in greater harm because of checkpoints that are set up, and you all can imagine that there's always criminal minds trying to take advantage of a crisis situation. So they're trying to get bribes, they're harassing them, physical abuse. So unless a person is an immediate threat in the place where they're staying, we're telling them to sit tight and wait for a safe, verified pathway out of the country. Next slide. Okay, then it's create a legal pathway, and that's what we're talking about right here with humanitarian parole. That's what Task Force Melmastya and AILA and all of the immigration attorneys and volunteer attorneys across the nation are trying to do. Third is physically moving the Afghan evacuee from Afghanistan to the US. And so once that legal ticket is in their hand, and we can talk about what in their hand means, because right now, as Mahsa said, even if something is approved, there's a question as to whether the Taliban will honor it or whether they need to go to a third country US consulate to get it finalized or not. Next slide. And fourth is supporting the Afghan evacuees once they're here in the US. So that is all the refugee assistance programs, for the Department of Human Services and the state, representatives for the Department of Human Services, and a number of support organizations that exist within the United States. So next slide. So phases 1 and 3 are what we call the operational phases. And this is, you've probably heard of groups like Task Force Pineapple or Afghan Evac. These are a lot of, former military that have been to Afghanistan, understand the situation there on the ground, and are volunteering their time and effort to network and communicate with Afghans to keep them safe in country and then move them when they're ready to move. And if I can just say a couple of words about our partner, AfghanEvac.org. I've spoken to a lot of different organizations, and AfghanEvac.org is by far the largest coalition that is working on operations right now. And they're tied in with a lot of the legal community as well, the veterans community, human rights organizations as well. For example, they are partnered with Human Rights First also. And aside from the operations, Afghan Evac is also trying to compile all of the data. So you can imagine all the data that all these different organizations are receiving from desperate Afghans, and they're trying to compile all that data so that we have it in one centralized location. Next slide. So this is an overview of operations, right? So this is from our partner Afghan Evac. It's a great slide that kind of explains the situation. So there's either air transit or there's ground transit. And like we mentioned with ground transit, it's a very dangerous situation moving from your safe house or home, across the country and then to the border and what may happen to you en route. So you're telling people to sit tight. Air transit, on the other hand, there is no military aircraft, since we do not have a diplomatic mission in the United States or military presence in in Afghanistan anymore. So all of the air transit has to be either NGO or some type of commercial or chartered airplane. So that also has its own roadblocks, and we can go to the next slide. So a lot of you that are here on this call may be getting information or requests from desperate Afghans that are trying to get out of the country saying, hey, I really need to get on a plane and get out. So this graphic just tells you about how difficult that is because of no military, that bottom leg is no longer exists. So an NGO contracted plane has to have landing rights, both in Afghanistan and then any place in transit, and then also permission to land back in the US. And so Afghan evac is not, departing with any airplane until they have all those rights secured, because other than that, if those rights are not secured, then it'll be a wasted effort. Next slide. So let's get back to what we're focused on, which is creating the legal pathway for Afghan evacuees. Next slide. So there is the humanitarian parole, which we are focused on today. And then many of you have also heard of SIV, P1, P2, and P3. Those are visa applications. So humanitarian parole and visa applications have separate tracks. So if you have a pending SIV, P1, P2, or P3, you can still apply for humanitarian parole at the same time. And humanitarian parole is supposed to be the emergency ticket out of a country. Whereas, for example, an SIV is if you work for US forces. So if you work for US forces, you probably are in an emergency situation. So you probably qualify for both. And we're encouraging folks to apply for both. If you already have a confirmed SIV, then that may be a different situation, and then you're just waiting for permission to leave country. Our task force has partnered with Parse Equality Center. It's a 501c nonprofit, and I know Seema is listening in, and I don't want to embarrass her too much, but the reason why we partnered with Seema Alizada out of Parse is Seema has been moving Afghans out of Afghanistan for over a decade. She has physically gone there. She's an expert immigration attorney, and this is the first year that she wasn't physically able to go to Afghanistan. So she has expertise that I don't think exists anywhere else in the nation. But obviously, all immigration attorneys are able to do this work. And so the American Immigration Lawyers Association has an Afghan task force that is working on this as well. And Mahsa is part of that. Vivian are part of that as well. So if you are looking for legal support, I would reach out to, if you already know an immigration attorney, reach out to an immigration attorney. If you aren't already plugged in with an immigration attorney, I would ask you to reach out to Task Force Melmastya, or you can reach out to AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we will get you in contact with legal counsel. If you are a law firm, so not individuals, but a law firm that is looking to join Task Force Melmastya. So for example, McDermott, Will, and Emery is working on this. Latham and Watkins is also working on this. If you are a law firm that is trying to join the effort, please reach out to me, because I have already gone through all the steps, like what is the proper engagement letter? How do you clear conflicts? All of those things that can kind of slow down the process for a law firm, we've already addressed it. The emails to your managing partner to get approval, all of that stuff has already been done. So please don't reach out to Parse because Seema will just forward that email back to me. And so we can guide you on that if you're a law firm. Next slide. So Parse is asking for funds, and all of the funds are being used for one of two things. One is to cover the $575 application fee that Mahsa mentioned. And the other use of funds is to hire staff from the Afghan American community, which I think is just amazing that they're doing, to become DOJ accredited to represent applicants. So for the immigration lawyers out there, if you're submitting a G28 with the application saying that you're the attorney of record, then you either have to be a barred attorney, or you can be a DOJ accredited non-attorney. And so Parse Equality Center is hiring from the Afghan community because they already have the language and cultural skills to do the work. And Fremont, where Parse is located, is the highest concentration of Afghans outside of Afghanistan itself. So they are working on that as well. So we would ask that you donate whatever you can to Parse. And I think if we haven't done so already, Casey will drop the links there that you can either donate through their Facebook page or their org website in the chat box for us. Next slide. Okay, the next and final step is once they're here in country, supporting the Afghan evacuees here in the US. And next step. So there are, for those of you that are looking to assist with phase 4, if you're here in Illinois, the Illinois Department of Human Services has a website that's dedicated to this. They have a list of all of the approved organizations that are assisting. One of the ones that I personally know is the Muslim Women's Resource Center, and Seema Qureshi from there is doing an amazing job. She's also an Afghan American who has been doing this for years. So that's assisting the Afghan Americans once they come here with social services, making sure they are tied in and receiving all of the benefits that they're entitled to. So I did see in the chat box, someone was asking about, being here temporarily, what's the next step? So once you're here in country, you can apply for asylum to stay here. You can also apply for any one of the visas that we covered, SIV, P1, P2, P3, if you already don't have that in process. So some of the national organizations that are known for their asylum work is Human Rights First, the National Immigration Justice Center, and the International Refugee Assistance Program. So if you're interested in supporting Afghans on their legal work once they're here in the United States, please contact one of them. Next slide. Okay, and I will turn it over to Vivian.
Thank you, Mir. I want to thank everybody that made this happen tonight, those that you see on the screen and those that are behind the screens. A lot of work went into this, and I am just privileged to be a part of the panel. So thank you again. Mahsa discussed the I-131, which is the application you use in order to file for humanitarian parole. Don't be alarmed if you haven't seen this form before when you pull it up after this presentation, that you're not going to see it called humanitarian parole application. It's an application for travel document, and it's used for purposes other than humanitarian parole. That's just one of 2 other purposes for this form. So I just wanted to get that point out of the way. Number 2, I saw a comment in the chat that I wanted to respond to. We are being reminded that Afghanistan is not an Arab country. That is true. So if somebody said that it was, I apologize for that on their behalf. That was a misstatement. It's a Muslim country, but it's not an Arab or Arabic speaking country. So thank you for, highlighting that. Not that it matters to me personally, because I'm not from Afghanistan yet. I'm very committed to the issue at hand and the issue that we're discussing here today. Another form needs to be filed concurrently, meaning at the same time as the I-131, or application for humanitarian parole. And that is USCIS form I-134. And that is the affidavit of support. What is an affidavit of support? It could be many things. Some people refer to it as a contract between the sponsor or the person filing it with the government. It's a promise one makes to the US government. It's an undertaking. Basically, what the I-134 does or is, it is filed by a United States citizen or a US permanent resident. So you have to be one of those 2, either a US citizen or a permanent resident. And it's filed on behalf of someone outside of the country, in this case, someone in Afghanistan, if we're talking about humanitarian parole. And you are promising the US government, or ensuring the government, that that individual will have adequate support upon arrival to the United States. And they will not become what is called a public charge. And that term, public charge, is a loaded term. So I don't want to use that for purposes of our discussion today, because there's a lot of intricacies. The law has been changed during the Trump era and post-Trump in terms of what it means to be a public charge. So let's just refer to that as a government liability. So the I-131 ensures that that individual will not become a government liability. So the first thing one needs to ascertain is whether or not the US citizen or US permanent resident sponsor qualifies. You need to show what's called sufficient income. And sufficient, may have many meanings. What I like to use, and what most immigration attorneys use, is the poverty guidelines. Casey, if you can pull that up, please. Thank you. It's called Form I-864P. Every year it is issued by the Department of Health and Human Services. USCIS refers to this document, and so should you. If you can please click on the, here, 48 contiguous states. Here on the left is the sponsor's household size. So let's say you are a sponsor. First, you look to see your household size. Here we have 2. That means you, the sponsor, and one other individual in your household. Perhaps it's your spouse. So you and your spouse would be 2, and the person you're sponsoring, if it's one individual, makes it 3. So your household size now becomes 3. If you're sponsoring 2 individuals and you're a family of 2, it's now 4. So let's assume we are sponsoring, it's me and my husband, and I'm sponsoring 2 people in Afghanistan. That would make me, or that would make my household size 4. We're going to use the 100% of HHS poverty guidelines, the 100%. The 125% is used if you're filing another type of affidavit of support for immigrant visas called an I-864. We're not here to discuss that today. We're here to discuss the other affidavit of support, and the 100% is relevant to that. As you can see, you have to show less income than under the other category here. That's why some attorneys refer to the I-134 as a half-affidavit rather than an affidavit, because you need to show more or less half the amount of income. So if I have a family or a household size of 4, I need to show at least a minimum of $26,500 on my federal tax return, the 1040, on the line that's called gross adjusted income. So we're not looking for your net take-home income. They're looking for your adjusted gross income. In the case of a household of 4, that needs to be at least $26,500. So that's what you, and then as you can see, you add $500 as your household site for each additional individual in the household. Here, if we're talking about 8 people, it's $44,660. So the dependents now, if it's 2 people, my husband and myself, and I've listed 3 children on my tax return, that would make 5 individuals. So any dependents claimed on your tax return go towards the count of your household size, and then you add the individuals you're sponsoring to determine how much you need to make. Okay. Thank you, Casey. If we can now take a look at the I-134. So now we've determined that we qualify in terms of income, and we're ready to file Form I-134. And we've also confirmed that we're either a US citizen or we are a US permanent resident. We hold a green card. This US citizen or permanent resident doesn't have to be physically in the United States. So as long as they qualify under either one or the other, their physical presence on US soil is irrelevant for purposes of the I-134. Part 1, information about you. You, the sponsor, the US citizen or green card holder, will complete the majority, or if not all, of page 1. Your full name, full legal name, any aliases or any other names you've used, your mailing address, your physical address, if you have a different physical address than your mailing address, date of birth, town and country. If you're a green card holder, you're going to put your A number here. Both citizens and green card holders have social security numbers. That is placed here. Then you have to indicate your citizenship or residency status. If you were born here, you do not need to complete this section. You have to read these questions very carefully, or else, it's going to be a disaster, because sometimes they're not as self-explanatory as one would like, and they're often confusing. And there really isn't much guidance out there from the government assisting us in completing these forms and this one in particular. So if you're not US born, you're naturalized somehow, or you became a citizen through the naturalization of a parent. And that would be the box you check here. So you would know how you became a citizen, and if you don't know, you're going to have to ask. Okay, but make sure you answer this question properly. Going on to page 2, you can go up a little bit. Again, I derived my US citizenship by another method. You know, there's many methods under the law by which you can obtain US citizenship. If you're not a citizen and you're a lawful permanent resident alien, you have a green card, then you would have an A number, and that is located on the card itself. That would be here in 11D. I'm a lawfully admitted non-immigrant. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me because you have to be either a lawful permanent resident or a US citizen, nothing else. So you're going to skip, in most cases, this here. Your age and how long you've resided in the United States. Part 2 is information about the beneficiary, and the beneficiary is the person you are sponsoring. So in our case here, it's the person in Afghanistan. This is where their information goes. You have to have their legal name as contained on their passport or their Afghani identification card, their date of birth and their gender. They would not, in most cases, have an alien number because that is given to people who've already filed certain immigration documents or possess a green card. Then it's a country of citizenship or nationality. In our case here, it's going to be Afghani, most likely. Now, there may be situations where their citizenship is something else, but they're in Afghanistan. I don't know, it could be a whole host of things. But again, Afghanistan would go here. The marital status of that beneficiary, married, divorced, widowed, you know, no such thing as legal separation and what have you in most of these countries outside of the United States. And then the relationship to the sponsor. What is the relationship of the person you are sponsoring to you? It does not have to be a relative. You do not have to have any formal type of relationship with the person you are sponsoring. So friend, acquaintance, whatever here would be a relationship with the sponsor. If you can go up, Casey. The physical address of the person in Afghanistan. Again, in countries such as Afghanistan and many places in the Middle East and elsewhere, we don't have addresses as we do here in the United States, where you have a number and a street address, what have you. It's mostly a village, a city, a governorate, you know, behind the 7-Eleven on the corner, whatever it is you put there. But don't expect to have a full-fledged typical address of the beneficiary. And then if that beneficiary is married or has children, you would need to enter that information on the form here. Spouse, and then children, 1 child, 2 children, 3, etc. If you need more room, then you would have to have an addendum. The addendum can be on a white sheet of paper, just reference the question, the continuation of the question that you are answering. You can go down, please, Casey. Okay, other information about the sponsor. Again, the beneficiary is the Afghani national, you are the sponsor. So this would be your employment information. So page 2 above would be the only page that is that relates to the Afghani national. Now, each applicant needs their own I-134. So if you have a family of 5, you're going to need 5 separate affidavits of support. So what I would do is I would complete everything related to the sponsor, and then all you would have to change on the other 4 or 5 forms is the information that pertains to the beneficiary. Everything else is going to stay the same, but the information related to the beneficiary, because you need to do 7 of them if you have a family of 7 or 6. So it's always easier to just reproduce the majority of the information and then change page 2 with the information that is relevant to the individual. So here, going back to the sponsor, employment information, employed as. That would be your occupation, the name of your employer. If you're self-employed, then you check the self-employed box and you put the nature of your occupation as a self-employed individual. The employer's address. If you're employed by an employer, it would be the company address. If you're self-employed, whatever address you use for your own company, or if you operate out of your home, then it would be your home address. Income and asset information. My annual income is, it's whatever your income is currently. What you're going to be attaching to prove that income is last year's tax return. We don't have a 2021 return yet. You're going to attach your 2020 return. Your income now may be in excess of or less than what the tax return states. So you put your current annual income. All you need, if that income is sufficient both last year and this year, in my opinion, is just your 1040, along with proof of employment, a letter from your employer that says you're currently employed. If your income is insufficient, that's where I start adding other assets here. You can add personal property and stocks and bonds to make up the difference in what you're lacking in income as stated on your tax return. Now, if we're speaking about an I-64, the affidavit of support that one would file for those seeking immigrant visas, the rule of thumb is that for every dollar that you are lacking on the return to have sufficient income, you have to make up for it 5 times. So if you're lacking $10,000 in your adjusted gross income, you need to show 10,000 times 5, which is $50,000 in the bank, which is a lot of money. You can also add the value of any personal property that can be quickly liquidated, meaning you're able to sell within a year and have the liquid cash to make up the difference. Stocks and bonds and certificates of deposit, real estate, all of that can be sold or liquidated within a year, and that could be used towards you proving sufficient income. A car, for example, can be used because you can sell a car. But if that's the only car you have, then that wouldn't qualify. You have to have more than one vehicle because you have to keep one car for yourself. So you have to prove that you have more than one vehicle before you can use one of those vehicles as proof of additional assets. Again, you need to be creative here. There isn't anything carved in stone. Consult with an attorney, consult with an immigration attorney. There's ways where you can reach that income by adding or taking away personal assets, real estates and the like, and it requires you to think outside of the box. Anything that's not applicable, just put NA. Don't leave anything blank, just put NA. Again, so if you have sufficient income on your tax return, I wouldn't disclose anything more if you don't have to. But if you don't know, always err on the side of more rather than less, because you don't want this thing to get rejected and then everything comes back. So the more you can provide the government in terms of proof of assets, the better. Again, life insurance, that's something you can cash out, so that can also be used. Real estate, I mentioned before, if you want to use it, just put the value. You have to put what the mortgage is, because if you cash out, you sell your real estate, you're going to have to pay the bank. So it's whatever the value is minus the mortgage is the number you're going to use. Then you have to indicate where that real estate is located. Okay. Dependent information, that's your dependents, the sponsors. And those dependents are usually listed on your tax return. So you would just indicate their name and the relationship. In the majority of cases, it's either spouse, children. Oftentimes, if a parent is dependent on you and you claim them as such on your return, then they would also go here. Their dates of birth, you'd indicate whether they're wholly dependent or partially dependent, and so on and so forth. If you can please go down, Casey. Okay. More information about the sponsor. Again, other dependents. We're assuming there's several dependents on that return and you have to list them all. This one here is important. I have previously submitted affidavits of support for the following persons. You are submitting an affidavit of support now and perhaps several others for other sponsors. That's not what they're talking about here. You do not have to disclose or list the other applicants that you are sponsoring concurrently with this one. They're only interested in knowing if you filed an affidavit of support for any individual in the past, that individual has already entered the United States, and therefore that affidavit of support is in effect. They're not asking about others you are sponsoring, and it's still, the process is still in motion. So you do not have to disclose those here in this section. If you can scroll down, I have submitted, I'm sorry, up a little bit here. I have submitted visa petitions to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services on behalf of the following people. That is, if you filed an immigrant visa petition on behalf of any family member or potential employee, you would have to list that here. Humanitarian parole applications aren't visa petitions. As Mahsa said, humanitarian parole is not a visa situation. Once you're here on parole, you do not have a visa. It's another legal fiction that is really not comparable to having a visa. So that does not need to be disclosed here. Only people that you've filed I-130 petitions for and the like, immediate relatives, and if you're a company, for any prospective employees. You can go up right here. Okay, so if you have filed visa petitions, you're going to have to list the name, the date of birth, and the date of filing. Number 38, I intend or I do not intend to make specific contributions to the support of the person named in part 2. That's up to you, whether or not you're going to be providing any support. Are you going to give them room and board? Are you going to give them a stipend for food? Will you be providing anything of any value to them? Or are you just, again, entering into a promise between you and the government that you would do whatever you can to ensure that they don't become a liability? If you will be giving them any ancillary contributions or monetary or anything of monetary value, you can indicate what that is, again, on a separate sheet of paper, and simply state, I will be providing room and board, or $100 a month, or $500, whatever it is you're going to be providing, you can list. If you can please go down, Casey. Okay, and here is your statement, contact information, and certification that everything is true and accurate to the best of your ability. Remember, my friends, that this is a legal document. Once you sign it, you are legally responsible for the contents of this application. So review it carefully, complete it properly with all of the proper information. Attach all of the supporting documents, be it a tax return, proof of your US citizenship, proof of your US permanent residency, the employer letter, proof of current income. If you're using any additional assets to make up any deficiencies in income, the mortgage statement that indicates what the payoff amount is, vehicle titles, your life insurance policy, your certificates of deposit, etc. All this needs to be attached to the affidavit of support and needs to be submitted in duplicate. Again, very, very important. You need to photocopy and have 2 of everything you're submitting. 2 copies of the I-134 is what I usually do, and then there'll be a copy of all the supporting documents attached to each copy and submitted simultaneously with the I-131. I think that's it. Don't worry, a lot of people had questions. Okay, well here, let's go through this. Interpreter, if this is being interpreted to someone that's completing it, you have to fill in the interpreter's names, contact information, and they're gonna have to sign it. And whoever prepares the application, I'm assuming it's, if it's an attorney, the attorney will put their information there. If it's a non-attorney and you prepared the application, you have to indicate you know, who you are and where you reside. You can go down. Okay. Again, other statements made by the preparer, whether or not you're an attorney. If you're not an attorney, you have to disclose that you are not an attorney. If you are an attorney, whether or not your representation of this individual on whose behalf you completed the application extends beyond the preparation of this affidavit. Most of the attorneys that are listening today, if you're going to be doing this and assisting clients pro bono or otherwise, it's most likely going to be limited to the filing of this application and not to anything else moving forward, or else you're going to be on the hook as the attorney of record for this individual in the months and years to come. And that is not something you don't want to do unintentionally. And then the preparer signs and dates. And here's an addendum page. So if you don't want to have a blank sheet for additional information like additional dependents and what have you, there's one here for you. You just indicate the page number of the question and the part and the item number, and you would put the additional information in this section here. Okay, so a lot of people are concerned about liability. You know, what, am I on the hook for anything if I do this? Again, legally, this is an agreement between you and the government that you're ensuring that this individual will not become a public charge or a liability. And they can only become a liability if they accept certain benefits from the government, and those unacceptable benefits are listed on the USCIS website. In my mind, I've always thought, I mean, what's the point? Because if you're not a US citizen or a permanent resident, you're not even eligible for any government assistance unless you are a refugee or an asylee. And those are exceptions to the public charge determination anyway. So, and then a humanitarian parolee is something very similar to an asylee. So any benefits parolees would be eligible for, I find it highly unlikely that the government will make a determination that they are a liability and therefore a public charge. So even though this is technically a contract that could be enforceable, and there's differences of opinion on whether or not this is a legally enforceable contract between the government and the sponsor, I have never seen an affidavit of support being enforced against a sponsor in my last 30 years of practice. I've never seen the government come after somebody that signed an affidavit of support because the beneficiary took food stamps or Medicare or Medicaid or what have you. So this shouldn't have a chilling effect. This term public charge and liability shouldn't dissuade you from sponsoring an Afghani evacuee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vivian. And just following up on that last point, you all that attended are going to be receiving an email to sign up if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, a financial sponsor, if you don't already have someone. But following up on Vivian's last point, in the sign up, you'll see the exact legal site to it. According to the Department of State's own Foreign Affairs Manual, the I-134 is not legally enforceable. So that should give you a lot more comfort about the government coming after you for paying back any type of money or public benefits, which traditionally parolees don't receive anyway, as Vivian mentioned, which is different than if you're sponsoring someone on like a fiance visa 864, where they say it is legally enforceable. Casey, if we could pull up my last couple slides. And we are gonna go long. I know there's a lot of questions. The panelists are gracious to stay a little bit longer and answer some questions. So after hearing all this, you're ready to be a financial sponsor. What do I do now? So the easy answer is, if you already know an Afghan that you're trying to help, just go directly to them or their US contact or their US attorney, and that's it. They will walk you through exactly what Vivian just did in filling out an I-134. Now, if you're just, hey, I want to help. I have no idea who needs help, but I'm here and ready and willing to fill out an I-134 for whoever needs help. Then you'll can fill out our sponsor intake form, which each of you will receive in an email after this event. For those of you that are joining through YouTube Live, if you can put in the chat your email address, if you're comfortable doing that, we can follow up because we have all of the emails for the folks that registered through the Eventbrite. Or you can go back to the Eventbrite site if you don't want your email, broadcast on YouTube. You can go back to the Eventbrite site and just, contact the host and then send your email that way as well if you're interested. Next slide. Okay, so if after hearing everything, you're like, you know what, being a financial sponsor, even though, financially put in quotes because it's not a legally enforceable commitment, but you're not comfortable being a financial sponsor, but you still want to support, I will direct you back to, the donation sites that we already listed. So, help the folks that need their $575 application fees covered, or help organizations like Parse hire from the Afghan American community to assist so that they can do the applications for Afghans themselves. Next slide. And so we are going to drop the donation links one more time in the chat for folks. And we do have some time for Q&A. So one of the things, one of the questions that we saw was, okay, so I'm ready to be a financial sponsor. How many people can I be a financial sponsor for? So if I'm financially sponsoring one person, do I have to show twice as much income like I have to do for my household for that financial sponsor? If I'm, want to be a financial sponsor for five member family, do I need to show 5 times as much income? So if Mahsa or Vivian could answer that, please.
No, you don't. So you don't have, if it's 5 people, you don't have to multiply the income by 5. Again, you don't have to disclose, and any additional people you are sponsoring are irrelevant for purposes of the affidavit of support. You do not have to list them. So you use your income, as though there's no one else. So you can finish the first one and move on to the second one with the exact same information you used for the first application. Mahsa, anything you want to add?
Okay, thank you. The other question was, do I have to be an individual to be a sponsor? So can I be an organizational sponsor? And if so, have you seen those being approved?
For the I-131 or the well, I guess the answer is the same for both. I'll let Mahsa speak to the I-131, but you can have an organizational financial sponsor. So they can complete the form. If they do not want to sign the form, they can attach a separate letter that indicates the nature of their financial support. So the short answer is yes, you can be an organization. No need to be just an individual.
And for those of you who are concerned that, the I-134 obviously asks for a lot of sensitive financial information. And so you may be concerned about who's going to see this. So our intake form for Task Force Melmastya, all we're receiving from you is your contact information. So your name, email address, phone number, your preferred method of contact. And then once we match you with someone that wants to be sponsored, they will take over and their attorney will be the only ones to see your actual information and putting that packet of information together. And then on the receiving end, the Department of State or the consular officer who will be processing the application will be, that's the only folks that see it. So we're not taking your financial information and broadcasting it saying, hey, you make $5 million a year, I can sponsor a ton of people or anything like that.
I'll just add in, there was a bunch of questions all kind of along the same lines of an organizational sponsor, how do they fill out the form? And there's really no correct one way to fill out the form. And the same with an individual sponsor as well. So you're really going to try to assess each case to see, okay, does the person have a high income, for example? If they do, then you might want to totally skip all of the information related to your property or other assets and that sort of thing. I might, for example, just include like an employment confirmation letter to demonstrate that this person still has that job, maybe a bank statement or two. So it really depends. When it comes to organizational sponsors, again, there's multiple different ways to fill it out. You could fill it out with the information of the institution itself and just have a high-level person within the within that entity sign the document in that capacity. They could submit information related to their finances. They could also submit just a letter explaining why. When that has happened, if I have an institution that says I only want to submit a letter, I don't want to actually sign the I-134, there's really no one here in that capacity that could do that, or whatever the situation is, I then try to get an individual to be the one to sign the I-134. So let's say there's a friend or family member in the US, even if their income is not high or they don't have a lot of savings, I will still have them sign the I-134, provide proof of their employment, explain what kind of support they're willing to give, and supplement it with a letter from the organization or entity that's willing to support it. And just try to explain everything, right? Again, this is mostly meant, for lawyers to really prepare and submit this, is what my advice would be. Be creative and explain how you plan to help this person once they get to the United States. What's the community engagement and level of interest in supporting? So there are many different ways to fill it out. Obviously, the more information you put, the stronger the financial support information you put, the higher the chances of success.
Okay, and then similar question. So, a lot of folks may be saying, hey, I'm ready to be a sponsor, but I don't know the Afghan beneficiary at all. And do they have to be geographically located close by me? Do I have to know them personally? Do I need to speak with them? If they come here and, turn out to be not good people, what type of screening do they go through? That's some concerns that we've heard. So if one of you could please address that.
Okay, well, you are not going to be legally responsible for any conduct of the evacuee upon entry to the United States. Your responsibility is limited to the I-134. And once the humanitarian parole application is approved, I mean, it's over as far as you're concerned. Mahsa, any other type of liability moving forward?
I've never seen anything in my 20 plus years related to this. This is, again, as Vivian explained early on, this is basically you're trying to demonstrate to the US government that there's people here in the United States who want to help the parolees, that will be there as a community, as an entity, as a neighborhood to support them in whatever way we can with either clothing, food, maybe some accommodations for a period of time, maybe helping them find a job. And that's another thing that I actually try to include on the applications is evidence of what the parolee would be able to do for themselves once they get here. So you might be working with someone that is a carpenter or a teacher or something where their job can easily be translated into the US. Or maybe that they have good English language skills and therefore they'd be able to find a job when they're here. You really want to try to find everything that you can to demonstrate that this person that arrives in the United States will not be dependent on the US government, for their livelihood, for their daily living.
And let's not forget that they still have an interview to go to at a US consulate abroad. That's going to vet them and question them, and that's not an easy thing for any applicant that appears before any embassy. They have to go through the ringer. So if there's any background that's negative about the individual, you can be certain that they're going to know, or they can find out.
So a question was about, who is so if you have a group of people, right? So a petitioner is asking for, their relatives to come and, so who counts as that family member? What is considered a family? Or is each, humanitarian parole application considered on its own?
Sorry, I was trying to type an answer here. What was the question, Mary?
Yeah, so what we're seeing a lot is groups, large groups of Afghan families trying to come over together. as part of one, humanitarian parole application. So if you can cover, what is considered a family, whether it matters, is each one, each applicant has to have its own application, but can they be sent in groups? And then what is considered a group for purposes?
Yeah. I've been submitting my applications as large family groups. So sometimes it might be 4 siblings, their spouses, their children, and their parents. And so I do submit them all together. I do try to include information on each person's application, kind of related to why they're afraid, why they're seeking parole. So for example, if one sibling was, in Afghan special ops and another sibling worked at the bank, monitoring, funds and transfers to make sure they didn't get into terrorist hands. And so there are 2 different bases of why this family unit is afraid. Then I would include all of that information in kind of one statement and copy it and paste it on other applications or as part of a statement that can be included with each application.
Okay. And Mahsa, we have a few questions about Afghan military. So I know we're focused on humanitarian parole, but what category does someone that's in the Afghan military fall under, whether it's SIV, P1, P2, or P3?
Yeah, so the P process is something that can only take place overseas. It is not something that one would apply for in the United States. It's a very slow process, and it may not be the best method for someone to try to get to the United States as quickly as possible. So actually, I have not filed any P applications. I've had a few people that would qualify for the P, but it just didn't seem to be a good fit for my clients. And instead, we did humanitarian parole. If a person has been going through the SIV process, but hasn't yet completed the process and is looking to get here quickly, then HP or humanitarian parole might be a good method to go through, or they might be able to try to transfer their existing SIV file if it's been approved and reached a certain stage in the process, and try to transfer it to another embassy. So for example, let's say someone was gone through the SIV process, have all of their approvals, and were even interviewed at the US Embassy in Afghanistan, but then their case was delayed. And then the embassy closed, and now they're still stuck in Afghanistan. So that person should try to find a safe way to leave Afghanistan, get to a 3rd country, and then request to transfer their file from, Embassy Kabul to whatever embassy, that they're closest to. So if they're in Islamabad, for example, or if they're in Uganda, wherever they might be. If a person did not have an interview yet, they will still follow the same process, request to transfer their file. But the problem is, if they never really had an interview, you don't know how far along in the process they were. And so humanitarian parole might be a good option to quickly, which is a relative term here, get to the United States and then finish their SIV process in the US. So again, that term that I used, quickly, is very relative to what is happening at the State Department, the lack of resources and staff that I talked about, and related to how long it's going to take CIS to adjudicate the humanitarian parole application, which again, we don't know how long it's going to take. The government is saying that it could take 90 days, maybe it would take 60 days, maybe 45 days. We don't know yet. Unfortunately, it's a very fluid situation, changing rapidly.
Another question that we have is, does sponsoring someone for humanitarian parole necessitate financial sponsorship? So I should clarify that the term sponsor is a little bit ambiguous of a term, because you can be a sponsor, meaning that you're filing the application, the I-131 that Vivian talked about, which is the actual application for humanitarian parole. So an attorney can work directly with the Afghan beneficiary that's still in country for that application, or they can work through a US contact who's filing it on their behalf. So for example, the way Task Force Melmastya has set it up, our clients are actually the US contact that's trying to get their family members here from Afghanistan. Because a lot of times, we don't have good communications or addresses for the folks that are in Afghanistan. So that person who's here in the US there's a lot of different terms that's used for them. It could be sponsor, it could be petitioner, applicant even, or requester when you look at the form. That is different than a person who's a financial sponsor. And so the financial sponsor is the person that's filling out the I-134, and they don't have to have any connection, as Vivian mentioned, and Mahsa talked about, to the Afghan that's trying to come to the United States.
And they don't have to be the same person. So the sponsor filing the I-131 that Mahsa talked about doesn't have to be the same person that is going to file the I-134.
Right. You can be both the sponsor and the financial sponsor, and in that case, you sign both forms, but you do not have to be. That's correct. Okay. Mahsa and Vivian, if you've been monitoring, I know a ton of folks have asked about benefits once they're here, how to get out of country, and so those are all like phase 1, 3, and 4. We're really trying to keep this focused to phase 2. So I would direct you to the resources that I mentioned for phase 1, 3, and 4 on my slides and your questions there, or to an immigration attorney to get those questions answered.
There's a question here about what if my US passport is expired? Like we said, you have to prove you're a US citizen. You can do that by submitting your US passport. The fact that a passport is expired does not mean that you are no longer a US citizen. A US passport is a travel document and still can be used as proof of citizenship. Having said that, however, I've had situations in different types of cases where the file was returned, or we received a request for evidence because the passport was expired. So the best evidence, it would be a naturalization certificate if you're a naturalized US citizen, or a birth certificate if you are US born, rather than a passport. And I know there's delays in renewing passports. I don't know if they've gotten their act together yet at the US State Department, but there was a 4 to 5 month delay in renewing passports.
So I just want to clarify in case someone misunderstands. Any person can submit the I-134 affidavit of support. They do not need to be a US citizen or a green card holder. They can actually be here as an F1 student, for example, or a B2 visitor. There is no requirement for that. And in fact, for some of my cases, I actually do not even submit proof of their US citizenship. And I'll explain it on the document, but I have not always been.
Okay. Ours was returned for that, and then the instructions by USCIS do say that. Again, when you.
No, because on the I-134 on part 1, question 12.
It indicates I-94 number. Yeah, if you're a non-immigrant, that's what confused me there.
Yeah, no, actually question number 12 is related to how old you are and how long you've resided in the United States. So you can be here as a non-immigrant. I might even argue that a person could be here without status if they have income.
And still file there.
And still file, but obviously it's better if someone can prove that they are here in the United States legally in order to sign the I-134.
Okay. I stand corrected there. Thank you, Mahsa.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so another question is, what happens to your case if it's rejected due to a missing document? Do you just resubmit and go back in line?
Yes, unfortunately. That is something that I've raised through AILA with the Department of Homeland Security, that if there could be better ways that the government not reject filings, but instead accept filings and correct any deficiencies with a request for evidence. We are hearing about a lot of cases that have been incorrectly rejected. And so we're advocating that Department of Homeland Security not reject an application if it can be easily corrected or deficient documents be submitted, because otherwise it takes time for the file to get back to the attorney or the person, and then you have to correct it and then send it back again. And as you said, now you're in queue behind another 1,000 people that already filed in the meantime.
Okay. For organizations, so how do organizations complete this form? Does a representative from the organization, and we're talking about the I-134, utilize their own personal financial information, or do they use the group's financial information?
I would generally submit the group's information if possible. If the group doesn't really have a lot of finances to be able to kind of demonstrate their intent to support, then maybe you would have the individual do it, but then obviously that becomes an individual sponsor and not an entity sponsoring.
Yeah, and a lot of folks have asked for a list of attorney contacts. So we don't have, permission to just give out everyone's contact information, because you can imagine they'll just get flooded with requests. So the best thing to do is fill out the intake forms that are available. Parse has an intake form on their website. You can contact AILA and email them. I'm not sure, Mahsa, do they have an intake form on their website for this, the Afghan task force?
No, so actually we're not, as a national bar association, taking any direct referrals. We have a team of pro bono attorneys that are taking them through PARS. But what we do have is some of our chapters of AILA do have some mechanisms to take referrals. Oftentimes it's done through a congressional office. So depending on where you live, you might want to look up and see if AILA, that AILA chapter for your region is offering to take cases. Otherwise, PARS is the best way to do it.
Yeah, so PARS, if you go to their website, they have an Afghan Support Project subpage, and there's an intake form for legal services there to get yourself representation. Let's see, I'm just scrolling through other questions. So someone asked, I know there's no limit on how many people you can sponsor, but do you have any rule of thumb? For example, is 2 to 3 family or 3 to 4 people too many for a single individual to sponsor? Is there any guidance on how many you can sponsor?
There's no limit that I know of. We've had sponsors sponsoring, more than 5. Again, because they're independent applications filed at different times. One is not dependent on the other. One doesn't take anything away from the other. Nothing I know of where the government has imposed a limit. Mahsa, you may have other information.
Sorry, again, I was typing an answer here.
Well, any limitations on how many people you can sponsor?
No,
Yeah.
especially if you have enough income or enough financial resources, you could sponsor 20 people, 30 people, 100 people. Please do consider doing that.
Oh, here's a good question. So any option to submit forms and documents electronically, or is it just
No.
hard mail?
Not on that form.
Okay. And for the attorneys out there, I just found this out today. So if you're a DOJ accredited representative, I found out that you should try to print your G28 on blue paper so that it sticks out in the packet when it gets there, so they have representation.
There was a question there as to whether or not you can appeal the denial. I mean, I haven't gotten a denial yet. I don't know about, but are they appealable?
Yeah, so just to make sure that everybody were on the same page, if your file is rejected, then you just need to refile. If it's actually been denied, please do contact MIR or PARS and let us know so we can look into it.
So here's a good question. So, okay, so the I-134 is not legally enforceable. So what is the point of it at all, if anything? Why does USCIS even want someone to fill it out and submit?
Yeah, great question. I think it just all goes to show that is there a support system that's going to be in place for that person when they get here? And as I believe, Attorney Khalaf mentioned earlier, this is something that, is typically used for other visa application types. When a person is trying to show to a consular officer, look, when I get to the United States, there's going to be someone there who's going to support me. I have a support system of some fashion or another. It's then been kind of cobbled together to be used for humanitarian parole. And again, it just goes to show that, hey, look, this person isn't going to just randomly come to the United States and, they know no one is going to be here for them, to help them, kind of get settled in, for lack of a better way to describe it.
So someone asked about fee waivers and whether it's recommended. I think Mahsa covered this earlier. So fee waivers can delay your processing. So obviously the best advice is to try to get someone that can help you with the $575 application fee so that, USCIS prioritizes that. If you don't have the $575 for all of the applicants and you want to submit like one group of applications together as a family, there are a couple things that you can do. One, you can hold off on submitting them until you have sufficient fees for all of them. The second option is just submit the one that you have, the check for, and then hold off on the other ones. The third option, and this is completely hit or miss, you can put the check for the first application on top, and then the rest of the packet include the fee waivers and mail it in all together. There's a chance that maybe whoever's processing it on the State Department side takes a look at it and goes ahead and processes the fee waivers while they're processing the one that's already been paid for. But obviously there's a huge risk there that they rip those apart and then send the ones that are requesting fee waivers to a separate pile.
Not only that, that's a very complicated application to complete. That visa, the fee waiver application, that requires somebody with some experience, and you don't want to complete it improperly and have it be the cause for rejection.
Yep. If I complete an I-134 and financially sponsor someone I don't know, do they have to come live with me, or are there other options? No, you do not have to house the person. Can you use a credit card to pay the fees? No, you'd need to send a paper check. Okay, so we're at about 8:30. So I think we're going to stop now. And then Casey, if you can drop the donation links one last time into the chat box for all of you, that would be great. Whatever you can do to support us, if you're not going to be an actual financial sponsor, would be great. And like I said, all of you that are attending, thank you so much for your time. And you'll be receiving a follow-up email to sign up to become a financial sponsor if you haven't already identified an Afghan. So Mahsa, Vivian, Sang, any last words?
Yeah, please, this is the time to step up and really help. Based on, my 20 years of experience, Attorney Khalaf's years of experience, there is really no downside to sponsoring someone. The US government is, openly expressed that they want to help the Afghan population. And I cannot imagine any scenario that they would, try to go after someone who submitted an affidavit of support for a situation like this.
Yes. Thank you, Mahsa, for pointing that out. And so there's no downside, but it is a requirement. So they cannot, humanitarian parole application cannot get processed without a financial sponsor.
Oh, and I did want to add one thing. Mir, you might have mentioned this earlier, but just to stress this, I've actually have some sponsors that are filing, willing to support my pro bono cases. I am preparing the entire package and mailing it to that person so that they can submit their own I-134, so that not myself nor anyone that I'm filing for will see that information. So there are lots of different ways where you can have your financial information be kept private and not made public to any of the other parties involved.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for attending and lending us your ears for an hour and a half. I really hope the webinar was informative for everyone. And please step up and help in any way that you can. Thank you very much and good night.